good afternoon, and welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinars, our premier digital educational platform featuring a variety of interactive programs providing you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where your team needs it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events here at NCIA, and as always, I'm very excited to welcome you all back to the return of our Committee Insights series of programs today, being presented by NCIA's Risk Management and Insurance Committee. Now, let's get this show on the road. We all know cannabis businesses face a plethora of perils unique to our growing industry. So in today's program, you will learn how to reduce the overall risk facing cannabis businesses through the implementation of proactive risk management practices. Sit back and settle in as our panel of experts will walk you and your team through a number of hot button issues specific to the cannabis industry, including cybersecurity, product liability, marketing risk, and the protection of high value assets. Well, I know our panel is eager to dive into this discussion, and our audience members are all interested in having their questions answered along the way. So let's not waste any more time. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome back our moderator for today's session, Matthew Johnson, the Vice President of Risk Services at QuadScore Insurance, to the virtual stage. He'll be kicking things off by introducing our panel of cannabis risk management and insurance experts. Welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials, Matthew. Great to have you back today. You can activate your video feed and take it away from here.
Thanks, Brian. I hope you guys can see me, and thank you for having us here. We're very excited to do this panel with the NCIA's support. So as Brian mentioned, we're going to cover a number of things in this webinar on how to protect your cannabis business from any number of different liability exposures, and focus as well on a very important matter, which is how to protect the cash that our cannabis clients are making around the country. So very excited. We've got a great group of folks watching. It looks like a really great panel here. I'm excited to introduce. So to start off in the order I see here, at least, we've got Simone Casson with Canis Capital up in Michigan. We've got Chris Payne with the Click Risk Retention Group, which provides insurance solutions for cannabis operators. Kevin Mullins with 3SI Security, which is a high-tech leader in cash security solutions. And finally, Danny Bizzuto with Cannabis Connect Insurance Services out in California, cannabis insurance brokerage. So everyone go ahead, turn on your cameras, let them see your beautiful faces, and we should be ready to kick things off. So we'll start off nice and easy with Danny Bizzuto here talking about how to protect your business from the different exposures you can face from cyber liability as well as management liability risk. So with that, Danny, would you like to take it from here?
Thank you, Matt. Hey, everybody, I'm Danny Bizzuto. I'm the co-founder of Cannabis Connect Insurance. It's a specialty division of Bizzuto Insurance. Put it together about, we're saying 2016. We saw a real need in the industry. A big focus of ours is making sure our clients understand what coverage does and doesn't do and how to manage risk around the limitations of your insurance. And so what that very hot topic, especially with all of the remote work last year, has been cyber liability. And when this coverage was put together about 10, 11 years ago, people really were expecting costs to come from a regulatory standpoint. But as we've seen, and as the data shows, it's really coming from a crime standpoint. And what this is people convincing either your employees or your management to either turn over money or in other times pretending to be vendors and providing different information than what your vendor's using and collecting payments from there. So cybercrime has been a big culprit. These businesses that are going after our industry and other legal businesses are true businesses. These aren't just one or two actors sitting out of their room. We have seen that these are people with CRMs, sales teams, sales goals, and even sales retreats. I saw one of a scamming agency taking their sales team down river rafting as a team building exercise. So again, some of the big claims we've seen have been someone calling in, pretending to be one of your vendors and just telling you that they've got a new payment, new payment account, new bank information, asking you to go ahead and update that and send payment there. A couple months go by and your longtime vendor comes to you and says, hey, I haven't been paid. We just want to collect on our account receivables. And that's been one big area. And another one, again, has been people impersonating executives and either having them download ransomware, opening up, PDFs that have some malicious code in there, or convincing them to transfer funds. And so what we see when we see a first party coverage cost is we are talking about things like reputation management, and that can be a way of maintaining customers during a breach and building confidence, as well as paying the ransom cost. So we can go ahead and go on to the next slide. Other lines of coverage that I'm going to be talking about are what we call management lines. It's a blanket term for a few different types of policies. And in this case, I'm going to talk about employment practice liability insurance, as well as directors and officers coverage. So employment practice liability is for any of the risks that arise from managing employees. That's claims of harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination, wrongful termination, and a hot topic in certain states, such as California, is wage and hour. These are all very common claims that come through, and this coverage is designed to protect you against allegations. They don't have to necessarily be true instances happening in the workplace. It's there to defend you for allegations. These claims can be quite costly and take a long time to resolve if carriers are not able to find a quick settlement. And directors and officers coverage, we saw a lot of activity in last year in the cannabis sector, as well as the tech sector. And this is for protecting officers, as well as board members, for their roles and responsibilities while sitting on the board of your company. Something that I stress with my clients here is that as a board member, your personal assets are at risk. That's the kind of liability that we're talking about. We're talking about protecting board members' personal assets. So these can be areas of breach of contract or misrepresentation. A recent claim example was a board member saw a need in the industry that they were serving as a board member, contacted one of their in-laws, got them to start up a company to address that need, and that was considered a stolen company secret. So that is also the kind of things that we see on directors and officers coverage. So this is just a quick overview of what we're seeing with these types of coverages. They're a little more nebulous than things like workers' comp or auto, much more allegation-based, and definitely require a lot of investigating. So if we can go to the next slide. And when it comes to managing risk, this is an area that we really stress. An ounce of prevention is really worth a pound of the cure here. And this is a real simple flow chart for a cyber claim. The type of trigger we're dealing with here is a stolen laptop, and it's broken out into 5 steps. And from here, what I really like about a plan like this is it's simple. You want to have a simple plan that you can break out and assign duties to certain people. So maybe every employee that has a laptop is aware that action 1 is their responsibility. They need to notify either a risk manager in the office, or they can have our information to notify us when a laptop is stolen. And then other people, maybe higher up, or people delegated to being safety champions, can go ahead and run through the other steps with us. There's a little bit of information that needs to be collected there, and they can be at the ready. And running through this simple chain helps prevent whoever stole this laptop from getting more information than they were able to previously if we had no plan, and also limiting claims costs. This also helps with carriers when we're talking about them and explaining why we're looking for a little bit of give here and rates, or maybe if it's not normally a fit for their program, why some of these controls can help out. If we go to the next slide. And over here, we've got a couple examples of plans that we put in place for clients with things like employment practice. So in California, I always talk with my clients about getting a motor vehicle record authorization at employment, and also stressing how their employment is contingent upon their insurability as a driver. You don't want to have an instance where you hire a driver and then you run their MVR and find out you can't put them on your insurance, because now you're in a bit of a conundrum if that wasn't established beforehand. So we talk about things like this that are obstacles we can see around beforehand and avoid hiccups and headaches as we try to backtrack through, and just kind of being ahead of these things and setting them up. On the directors and officers side, really what we stress, and I stress with my clients, is board harmony. And sometimes that can mean some tough decisions, but if you have a board that's working in harmony, there's a lot less likelihood of things like an insured versus an insured issue where maybe one board member is filing a complaint, or you have an executive who's disgruntled. I've seen cases where exit packages for an executive that's not getting along with the board, have just a simple mistake in executing it on the timelines and it costing a client $300,000 just because it was a couple dates were missed on the execution of that contract. The other thing is always making sure you keep the reasonable business judgment rule in mind. Now, directors and officers, carriers use attorneys to handle these claims, and that's really like a cornerstone defense for them. And really what it is would a person in your position, a reasonable person, or consider this action reasonable? Would an average person sitting in your seat consider the work or the choices you made reasonable? If that answer is yes, the carrier's attorneys are going to feel pretty confident on the defense for that case. A very old example, but I like to bring it up, was when Target had the large breaches. They had been advised multiple times to close some security gaps. And there was a $10 million directors and officers lawsuit that fell on the back end of that because it was deemed that a reasonable person would have closed those security gaps by the second or third notice from security professionals. So that's something to always keep in mind when making decisions as a board and wanting to know what the rationale is if we ever have a claim scenario. And as we through the next area, again, why we want to have a plan, we want to eliminate confusion. If a claim takes 72 hours to resolve and collect all the information for the carrier, that's a lot of extra time and extra cost that gets put back on you as the business owner. Having these also are great for the underwriters. When we show underwriters that we have response plans in place, we have safety plans in place, it becomes something that we can use to leverage to your advantage. And one other thing, as we'll hear from another speaker, this can also open the door for entering into more complex programs like a risk retention group or a captive. If you're controlling a lot of your risks in-house and you have really strong controls, you can enter into some of these more complex programs that provide a lot of financial benefit at the assumption that you're going to take on more risk. And you can take that risk on more easily with a established plan that many people in your company are comfortable following and executing. And then one other point is if your exit strategy for the company involves selling, this is a common way to leverage these policies into getting a different negotiated price. Because if you are, and I see this also with my clients in tech, if you have an established directors and officers policy and an employment practice policy, those purchasers are coming in to buy your assets and they kind of want to know what to do with these trailing liabilities. Well, those policies can answer some of those concerns. And that's something that is much easier to negotiate with and also execute with the carrier when you have a history and a policy in place versus going to market and telling an insurance carrier you're planning on selling in the next 30 to 90 days and you need them to buy a policy and also provide you multiple years of coverage for liabilities that they're not aware of because you're a brand new entity for them. And that is, with that, I'll go ahead and pass this back to Matt. Thank you very much, everybody.
And Danny, great job. Do have one question there. We'll be covering money and investments in cannabis a bit later in the program, and D&O coverage is available for both public and private companies. I remember a couple of months ago reading an article about CannTrust, where 3 Canadian cannabis executives had a nasty list of charges against them: insider trading, issuing a false prospectus, fraud. Just not great things to have on your resume. So if you're an investor and you want to put money into a cannabis business, you want to make sure that you're working with a client who has a risk management plan and appropriate insurance in place. Is that right?
Yes, and also with the points of misrepresentation, if you're a board member who's not involved with that portion, let's say a different board member was involved in that misrepresentation, you're still brought in on that. And you're still at risk. So this will provide coverage for you. The clawback carriers will do is if someone did commit a crime, they'll only, clawback coverage for that individual. The board members who weren't aware of that are still going to be protected. That's an important piece there. And last year, that was what a majority of the claims were. There was a lot of allegations of misrepresentation on financial projections to investors. And typically when we have a year with any kind of disruption in the economy, investors turn around and look at their investments to really see, do a deeper dive on the financials and the projections provided to them to see if there's avenue for them to maybe claw back some of the money they had invested through D&O policy.
Absolutely. Well, that's definitely an area to keep an eye on. Cyber, we do a whole webinar on that with claims for Colonial Pipeline, CNA Insurance, groups like our Evil out there who are, like you said, doing this as a true business and going on company retreats. So.
And cyber carriers are evolving. I really recommend that you find an IT provider who can work with you. If they do have a specialty in security, bringing them on. If they have an outside partner they recommend, I would strongly suggest you bring them on. Carriers now are starting to work hand in hand with your IT department. I've got a couple that'll actually monitor network traffic to help the IT department assess threats. They are really starting to step up and look at this in a more complex way, because it is really a complex nature, as these culprits can be in any part of the world. And as long as you have a data connection, they can get to you.
Wow. Well, definitely make sure you're covered and you've got a good plan in place. Thank you for that coverage there. Really appreciate that. And now looking forward to introduce Chris Payne to talk more about general liability and product liability for the cannabis industry. Some areas where there might be less claim history, but certainly an anticipation of some to come in the coming years. Chris, would you like to take it from here?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Danny. Good to be with you today. I'm the founder of Click Risk Retention Group. We're a captive insurance company that provides general liability and product liability to cannabis licensees. I want to start by encouraging everybody to focus on not just compliance, but safety. Compliance is what we do to maintain our licenses. Safety is a culture of safety, is how we show to juries and third parties that we care about the health and safety of our customers. I want to give everybody the obvious warning that the trial lawyers of America are building their strategy for the cannabis industry. This is a soon-to-be $40 billion industry, and the trial lawyers will hold you to account for your actions. They see an industry that has a sometimes patchy record on quality control, frankly, some bad actors too. Now, as Matt pointed out, so far there have been relatively few product liability claims, and most of them are minor, but that's going to change. And it's important to know that in product liability, it is what's called strict liability. So if you are part of the chain of production and distribution, you are equally responsible for the injury caused by the product, no matter what you did. So it's very important, first of all, to know that you're operating a safe business, but also that your vendors, suppliers, and business partners are doing the same. Now, as I say, we haven't seen many cases and very few trials, but the ones that do come forward will be carefully selected by the trial lawyers for the sympathetic nature of the plaintiffs and for the devastating injuries or death that cannabis products are alleged to have caused. So far, we haven't seen many of those, as I said, but I encourage everybody to check out the filings in the Cushy Punch case here in San Diego, which involved the unfortunate death of a young lady who consumed cannabis products. We don't know all the details yet, but that is going to be an interesting case because the filings characterize the defendants, and plaintiffs' attorneys will do this for the whole industry. They will characterize the defendants as reckless, greedy, and willing to put profits ahead of the safety of their customers. And if you can't demonstrate and prove that you operate a safe business, it's going to be very difficult to settle those cases at reasonable amounts, and it will be almost impossible to take your case to a jury because the risk of presenting a shoddy or second-rate safety program to a public jury involves the risk of a catastrophic award, and your lawyers will not want to do that. So ask yourself, do I have that culture of safety? And second, can I prove it? Now, the first thing you got to do is 5 big things. You've got to do accurate content labels. There have to be clear instructions on how to use the product. No advertising that makes unsubstantiated claims, health claims, or advertising that is aimed at children. Safe tamper-proof packaging and warnings of the risks, particularly what might happen if you consume cannabis. And this is increasingly the case that injuries that we're seeing are not coming from smoking cannabis, but from ingesting it. There is a growing body of evidence that says that the cannabis can be more dangerous to certain people if they ingest it. And in the Cushy Punch case, they make a strong point that there were not adequate instructions on how to use the product and the time it would take for the product to have effect. So all of this comes down to a simple thing. If you get a claim, you need to be able to show that you're a safe and responsible operator, or you're going to have to settle the cases at higher values because you can't defend your practices. And everything that you do, all your decisions about revenues, profits, safety, testing, is all going to be made public if you go that route. The good news is if you operate a safe business and you're fully compliant with all the regulations, you have a very good chance of defending yourself. But you have to make the full disclosure about what is in the product and how to use it. The thing I would encourage people and your clients, if you're in the insurance business, I encourage them to do is think about how safety drives down cost. It's not just that safety is a good thing in itself. It drives down insurance costs. It drives down operational costs. If you're operating a really efficient, safe manufacturing business, there are fewer product recalls. You have less reputational risk. And in the end, all of those things mean safer consumers, happier consumers, more profitable businesses, lower insurance costs. So in short, the business has got a choice that it can't avoid. The cannabis industry is going to decide whether it's going to be a hard target or a soft target. And if you're a soft target, you're going to pay the settlements and you're going to pay the higher insurance premiums. And if you're a harder target, you're going to have to pay for the cost of safety and making sure that you have a fully defensible set of facts that your lawyers can take to a jury. So most businesses in the long run decide that it's cheaper to pay for safety, if only because you're only paying one set of lawyers. But the cannabis industry is a young business. It's growing fast. It's a big target. And everybody in it should understand that the trial lawyers are going to select their cases carefully to establish precedent and drive the costs higher. And if you're not ready for it, it's going to be a very expensive education. Matt, I would kick it back to you if anybody's got any questions about what I have said. I think I'd wrap it up by saying, don't just rely on your insurance company. You know your business better than the insurers do. Make preparations and be prepared to defend yourself if you have to. So, Matt, back to you.
Well done. Love that. And before I let you go, would like to ask too, with the Cushy Punch claim in particular, I remember, I believe the occurrence there, the date that the flight attendant who consumed the gummy actually consumed it and then unfortunately passed away was late in 2018, but the lawsuit wasn't filed until 2020. Right. So what within product liability policies should these insureds look to have to make sure that they're covered for prior occurrences that they might not be made aware of for years?
Yep, everybody should have a careful conversation with their broker about retroactive dates, coverage forms, what is covered, what should have been notified to prior carriers. All of those things are vitally important.
Perfect. Well, yeah, as long as you make sure that you have those conversations and you're covered for as long as the statute of limitations in your state decrees, or as long as you've been in business, you should have an easier time getting to bed at night. And hopefully, yeah, you're only paying one set of lawyers. So love that.
Give your own lawyers something to defend you with.
That's the spirit. Well, perfect. Thank you, Chris. Next up, we've got Kevin Mullins with 3SI Security. Kevin is the Vice President of Emerging Markets and really excited about helping the cannabis industry protect their growing assets. Kevin, you want to take it from here?
All right, awesome, Matt. Thank you. Listen, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. As you said, my name is Kevin Mullins. I'm the Vice President of Emerging Markets for 3SI. 3SI is really the world's leader in GPS asset protection solutions. We work heavily in the financial services industry, in high-end retail, pharma, jewelry, and in cannabis. When we talk about cannabis protection, it's really protecting your cash, your cannabis, protecting your property, and ultimately protecting your people. And so excited to talk about that. We want to talk about really kind of switching gears, what Chris has talked about, what Danny's talked about. They talked about, some different potential risks. We're going to talk about risks associated with security and primarily physical security. And kind of understanding that physical security is a business unit of your cannabis operation. And when you're using this effectively, when you're operating as you should be, it really becomes potentially a profit center. It allows you to be able to maintain the profitability and the overall success of your operation. So we want to talk about that, and kind of the next slide, we'll talk about some risks and some challenges that are faced in the cannabis industry. I mean, obviously we know it's high value assets. So it's cannabis and cash, and these assets can be easily spent. They can be easily transferred to other commodities, something that can be difficult to trace as well. So that's always a challenge in the industry that we work in. Obviously, we have increased safety for staff, and then we have liability issues that can show up. Look at parking lot crime. And we've seen parking lot crime increase 69% over the last year. We've seen a lot of challenges come in, and some of these are kind of socially driven and just issues that we deal with, and then how we ultimately mitigate the risk associated with those. So again, challenges moving through. There's a seed to sale requirement. No other industry has to have the logistics chain so built in to be able to manage this process. And what are potential issues associated with that as we shift product and cash? We're going back and forth from grow to distribution to retail, and how's all of those cash and products are being transferred? Where's the risk associated with that, and how you mitigate the risk through those processes? Transport requirements, cash and product, kind of understanding that we're taking product from one location to the other, cash gets transferred. We talk to a lot of customers and we ask them, how are you handling this, motor cargo carrier risk? And you really need to go back and look at what, your limits are, look at what your processes are, kind of understanding that. And a lot of times we want to operate as efficiently as possible. So that means let's take as much product as we can and ship that out. And then what's the risk associated with that, when it might be easier to split those up, maybe change routes, those kinds of things. Because again, someone's watching you, someone's casing you, and understanding the risk associated with that. When we look at organized crime, gang crime, that's something that's extremely common in the cannabis industry and what's been hit. We kind of learned a lot in 2020 with seeing where those risks are and seeing what has happened. We had in certain cities, in every dispensary in the city was hit in 2020. We've also had cities that have seen multiple hits over a period of 3 weeks of time. And so huge concerns with that risk and how we ultimately deal with it. And so again, kind of keeping in mind as we're building, our physical security program, being able to measure, monitor, and understand what those risks are. And that allows us to be able to mitigate that. Next slide. Obviously cash intensive, it's all cash for the most part. Unfortunately, I feel, as many in the industry do, that it's going to be some time before the banking system federally is opened up to the cannabis industry. So again, how you manage that risk associated with that. And so it's not only this day-to-day operational cash, but then you have cash storage, you have requirements in dealing with that. And so there are ultimately risks that continue to grow around that. Hours of operation, crime has a schedule. It's typically 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. 70% of crimes occur during that period. And it's also at times when you can be most vulnerable, and also times when you may have limited staff numbers in there to be able to mitigate that, and kind of, again, building that program to understand that. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can help mitigate that risk. highly susceptible to robbery and theft, internal and external. Internal shrinkage is a huge issue. Most of you have to report that, and kind of understanding, how much shrinkage you have there. And there are ways to mitigate that. There are ways to limit that shrinkage piece. From an external standpoint, Wharton did a study that says, 1 in 2 cannabis dispensaries will be robbed. The ABA put information out saying 1 in 5. CUNA came out with information that says 1 in 2. So it's not always a matter of if we're going to get robbed or if we're going to go to these types of events. It's just when. And so what can you do, again, to build your program to mitigate that? Crime rates are increasing in frequency, and in violence, and we're seeing that grow. We don't have the 2020 numbers out yet, but we saw an increase kind of coming up out of 19, and it's going to be, we believe, substantially higher kind of with what's happened over the last 18 months. And then you have multiple zones of vulnerability. So we typically kind of break out zones of vulnerability within a cannabis operation into 5 separate zones. And all the way from your backroom vault, moving into a front vault, moving into your operation, your retail facility, into your parking lot, and then beyond. Now that we're seeing curbside delivery, we're seeing home deliveries, where are those vulnerability points built there, and what can we do to ultimately, curb that? Or, but part of your understanding in your operation is those zones, and what each sections of risk are involved in each one of those zones, and then it helps you build your platform and ultimately mitigate those risks. Next slide. So questions to ask, what's happened over the last 18 months? What has changed? We kind of talk about the 4 Ps. So it's policies, practices, procedures, and people. What changes have you seen and what's happened there? We see a lot of changes. Is it common now for people to wear masks and hats and gloves and glasses? And what, 2 years ago, we may have looked back and we see the potential risk with that. Well, it's a very common occurrence now. It's almost everyone coming into our operations look like those people. And so it can be difficult. We look at what typically we were using, video and forensic video to go back and be able to, how do we capture that person, or how do we get information from that? And now the data we're getting at is saying, well, the person was somewhere between 6'2" and 5'7". That's about all we're getting out of it. So what do we need to do to, to subsidize or to be able to manage that risk? And there are ways ultimately to do that, using some advanced technologies, using some solutions out there that will catch people in the act, as opposed to trying forensically go back and look at what's going on there. Another piece too is from a law enforcement standpoint, kind of bridging the gap to law enforcement. It's much easier to catch someone in the middle of a crime as opposed to having to go back and try and pull data, try and look at what did happen, get that on the schedule, interview people as we need to, review that data, and then ultimately try and catch that person. So it's so much easier to catch someone in the middle of the event. Another question to ask yourself, as robbery, theft, other events, have they increased? They increased in my area. Have I looked at other operations in close relation to my geographic footprint? Have we looked industry-wide what's happening? Where are those vulnerabilities? And then again, building a plan, talking to people, working with other people that do this within their operations, helping you build that risk mitigation plan. And again, also looking at other solutions that are out there. Document everything that you're doing. We've talked a lot about liability back to an operation. When typically, when a company, when an operation, when you have a risk event, something that has caused a financial issue within the operation, who do fingers get pointed at? And they're going to come back and be pointing at you. If you have the correct documentation, it helps to mitigate that risk. Train your people. That can be difficult because we're seeing huge numbers of turnover within employees and within staff, within the industry. Be sure and train your people. That ties back into documentation and understanding that. Have the budget. Do you know what the industry standard is for a budget? What percentage of your budget should go to physical security? You need to know that, and you need to understand that. Understand what compliance is, make sure your people do, and then having those resources in order to be able to, again, deal with issues that you potentially do. Understand industry standards. We all fall under a regulatory standard. We build a security plan. We have to follow that. but what's a best practice standard and what's an industry standard? Those are kind of the three above line standards. Think about an appropriate, a field, and a conventional. And conventional may be totally outdated, but kind of understanding as we continue to evolve as an industry, have we aligned physical security with the evolution of our operation? And that's something that we need to constantly look at and constantly understand. This ties into, do I have the proper insurance coverages for robbery, transport, theft, and employee risk? And encourage you to go back, look at what your limits are, look at what's being covered there. Transport is a huge piece. We talked to different companies that we're working with, and they're transporting large sums of cannabis, large sums of cash, but they have little or no transport coverage in that. So that's a concern. That's a concern to your operation. That's a concern to you personally. And kind of understanding that as we continue to grow, which what is corporate America? Cannabis is corporate America. It's corporate Canada. But as we're taking monies in, as we've mentioned earlier with what Chris and what Danny mentioned, we're taking dollars in. But when things go wrong, where do fingers get pointed? And so understanding where those risks are at a micro level is protecting the assets of your operation, but at a macro level is really protecting the entire industry. And you have risk of losing assets, we have people risk, but you also have to understand there's reputation risk and things that become involved when you leave yourself open and you go through some type of a physical security breach. Also understanding, have I looked at the technologies to mitigate risk? There's a reason why bank robberies, 15 years ago were at 7,000 robberies per year. They're down to about 2,000 right now. And it's because of use of advanced technologies to mitigate that, to be able to capture these people in the middle of crimes, and ultimately you're deterring these robbery events. There were times in the industry where you didn't want a bank next door to you because of just concerns about what could happen from a robbery standpoint. Now you want the bank next to you because of convenience. The same thing where the cannabis industry will go, and we know we can take that. So looking at technologies to manage robbery, risk, shrinkage, transport, ATMs, and then ultimately staff safety. So I'd love to talk more about that, but we're kind of limited on time, and so happy to answer questions at the end. But I want to get into the last slide that I have is on a case study. And so this ties directly into those advanced protection technologies. A cannabis operation in Washington State, late 2020, individuals come in, assault rifles, fully decked out, totally covered coming in, putting employees on the floor. They go sweep cash, they sweep product, they put it into bags. Staff members were assaulted, they're out and they're gone. That cannabis operation said, we're not going to let that happen again. They purchased GPS tracking technology. Late last month, same MO, guys come in, guns, down on the floor, AKs to the back of your head. They sweep product, they sweep cash. 31 minutes after that, they're in the back of a police cruiser going to jail. So there are solutions out there that allow you to be able to have these people apprehended. Studies show that events go so much better if you can get the assailant in and out in 2 minutes. Don't confront them. Don't get into an issue with them. Give them what they want, let them get out, and have them be caught by doing exactly what they want to do. And situations turn out much, much better. In this event, no one was injured. These suspects were believed to be involved in multiple robberies, potentially the same suspects that had hit this same operation just a few months earlier. So potentially, again, organized crime, gang crime, but these guys are off the street now. So again, appreciate your time, appreciate you listening in, and looking forward to any questions at the end.
Yeah, Kevin, great stuff there. Would love to hear a bit about the origins of 3SI and how successful you guys have been. Obviously, that's one scenario, but when you look at your service in the cannabis industry as a whole, how often are you guys apprehending the suspects who make away with cash or cannabis that isn't theirs?
It's a great question, Matt. It's 3SI goes back 50 years. So it's our 50th year. We're celebrating this year. We go back to smoke and dye products. So working primarily in the banking industry. We've evolved that into GPS technologies. Right now, we work in 96 of the top 100 banks. We work, again, high-end retail where you have those high-value products. Cannabis for us is an emerging industry. We have a perfect record at this point in being able to capture your product, your cash, and ultimately apprehending people. So very excited about the industry, and just really looking forward to growing what we do.
Oh, awesome. It's definitely a big concern there on the insurance side of things. We've seen claims from we had an inside job 2 weeks ago with the security guard. You get armed robberies like you were talking about. We've seen obviously mobs of opportunistic people during the riots and civil unrest last summer. Even seen a heist style deal where they carved a hole in the ceiling and dropped down with ropes into a vault room to grab cannabis out of there. So as an insurance carrier, I can confirm that we feel a lot safer underwriting an account when we know that those businessmen have taken measures to install a security device like what 3SI has to offer to keep track. So love what you guys are doing. Hope you keep that perfect record perfect a little bit longer, and appreciate your time here.
Thanks, Matt.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. With that, we'll transfer to Simone. Kevin just covered how to protect the cash that you've already got on hand. Simone will be focused a little bit more on how to protect yourself while you're trying to get some money to start up and fund your business, and the different kind of risks that come with that. So Simone, are you here? Can we?
Yes, I'm here. How's everybody? I was
Better.
trying to give you your time to shine. How's everybody doing?
We're rocking. I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, great. So I'm Simone Cason. I am the owner of Cannabis Capital Insurance Agency. We insure everything from seed to sale and everything in between. And I'm also the owner of Cannabis Capital Securities, and we're now in the process of registering as an interstate business where we'll be doing interstate transactions with raising capital for companies in Michigan. So very, very excited about being here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm gonna jump right in. As you guys have heard everything, we've talked about the different risks and the different things that we have to manage. And one of the keys to that, as you've heard over and over again, is our directors and officers insurance. And that's a really big thing when you're looking at mitigating risks and kind of managing risk, because as we all know, one of the biggest hurdles, whether we talk about compliance and regulatory, wherever you are in this industry, probably one of your biggest hurdles is going to be access to capital. And whether you're in the concept stage of your business, whether you are a startup, whether you're looking at growth and expansion, or what have you, access to capital and being able to build and growth and have capital is always a big, big deal for us. And so in a nutshell, when we look at insurance, as Danny got a chance to talk about, and even Chris touched on it, and even Matt, is one of the key things, whether you are, even if you are an investor or a business owner, is having directors and officers insurance. Because when you are selling shares, or when you're offering equity or ownership in your company, or even if it's debt, right? If you're issuing bonds and there's a loan or credit, you are, as the founder, the fiduciary of this business, meaning that it is your job to be able to offer the best situations for the people that you are looking at getting shares for. So that's your job. So anytime that a management company is seen, a management or the directors or the officers, if their decisions, as we talked about, are not reasonable and they're deemed to be a result of a loss in profit or loss in return, then you can be sued, right? So that's pretty much how it goes. And I want to make that very, very clear. So as we go through this, making sure that you have directors and officers insurance, but still, let's talk about some other ways that you can mitigate this risk of being exposed when you're looking for shareholders, or even if you're looking at debt. Now, there's no shortage of investors. There's no shortage of funds. I probably talk to 5 or 6 fund managers a week in cannabis that are focused on getting businesses via mergers and acquisitions, or these can even be businesses that they are offering concept, maybe expansion, or looking at these funds. There's no shortage, right? In addition to that, we have to understand that we are in a time where money looks so different, right? Money looks a lot different now. Before 10 years ago, when we talked about people becoming investors in startup companies, you had to be what we consider accredited or institutional. Accredited or sophisticated. Accredited investors are those investors who have about $1 million or more to be able to invest, the uber rich. Sophisticated investors would be able to invest in these opportunities, but that just pretty much mean that they had done this before. They've had an investment, a risk tolerance, and a host of other things. Well, as a founder and as a business owner, it is your duty to be able to find and mitigate the risk on what individuals and what entities will work best for you, and which ones meet your qualifications, and which ones you're going to meet their risk tolerance. That's very, very important. So let's look at what this means. So a couple things that you need to know. Who are you seeking as a investor? Meaning that, is this a retail investor? Is this someone who has limited funds? Because as we've already said, that now we're in a place where we have crowdfunding, we have Series A, Series B. We're going to talk about all of these different ways that you can raise money. But it is imperative for you to first create an avatar of who is your investor. This is going to mitigate the risk, because guess what? Investing, remember this, is a privilege. It is not a right. Everybody doesn't have the right to be able to be investors. Most of the time on the financial floor, we always say the people with the least amount of money are usually going to be the bigger headache. Now, as we're having more and more conversations about investing, more and more retail investors are more interested in actually investing in these companies. But you have to know where you are and where they are so that you guys can make a harmonious decision. All right. So first things first, who are you seeking? The next one is, what does that investor want? So we probably hear a lot. I'm on a lot of different platforms where we talk about angel investors. We talk about venture capitalists. You may hear the words of people, that are going through Reg CF. What does that look like for you? Understand that a lot of investing actually considers a couple different things. It could be through cash, it could be through experience, or it could even be through management. So all of these things play a part in you building and growing your company. So you got to determine, what are you looking for and what are you looking to achieve when you are looking for an investor or being able to partner, right? And all of those decisions should still be made by the directors, the officers, and the founders. The next part, what is their risk tolerance? If you are a startup company or a concept company, meaning that this is something that's in your mind and that we really haven't come to fruition, then you have to make sure that you understand their risk tolerance. Now, more investors are going to be people with more money will probably have a higher risk tolerance, but this is based on how money makes you feel, right? So you can have a major entity that wants to invest in this cool technology cannabis product that you have, but they don't have the risk appetite. They don't have the risk tolerance. It doesn't meet their portfolio. So you got to make sure you understand that. And then last but not least, make sure that you understand your investor's cycle. Not everyone is investing all the time. There are going to be times with investors that sometimes they're looking at bringing in returns. And then there's other times that they're looking at more riskier entities. And then last but not least, they may just be in the middle. So being able to keep track of who you've pitched your idea to, who's your targeted market, what their risk tolerance is, and all of those other good things are going to help you mitigate the risk of having to utilize your insurance for D&O.
Beautifully said, Simone. Thank you. And yes, again, on the insurance side of things, we love it when you don't have to use our insurance policies and actually make us pay up for something. So thank you there. This has really been a year of just unprecedented consolidation with mergers and acquisitions through the window, investment everywhere you look. Simone, what would be the number one piece of advice that you would give a cannabis company looking for investors in 2021?
No, well, I would say make sure that you know your audience, and then last but not least, making sure that you understand the different levels of being able to invest. And so, I mean, to be able to raise money. So depending on where you are as a company, and that's a very, very big part, know where you are as a company. If you are in the concept startup phase, then you're probably going to be looking at Reg CF, which is that you can go up to $5 million. If you have more of a proof of concept where you built out a product, you've got something going, somebody can go in there, you can probably be able to look at Series A, which that's $5 million to $15 million. And then B and C, those are going to be companies with more true proven track records. Those companies, those entities, and those accredited investors, they're looking at saying, hey, I still believe in you and I want to get into the ground floor, but I'm willing to help you raise more money. And a lot of times that could be up to $30 million. So understand where you are in your process, and that will help you also mitigate a lot of the risk, because you'll be able to target the investors that you need and the investors that are looking for you.
Perfect. And I've got to ask too, I know you've done something really, really cool in Michigan. Can you tell us a bit about it's the Michigan marijuana market, right?
Yes. So we are in our final processes, right? So I got a chance to be the chairwoman for the MRA, which is the Michigan Regulatory Agency, which is our governing agency. And one of the things that I was posed with was to come up with a way for access to capital. So in this, what we're doing is, and so if you guys know anybody, I'm going to put this pitch out too. I created a local stock exchange. So Michigan actually has a law which is called the Michigan Investment Local Exchange, and a couple of bill and another bill. And I found this bill, right, dug through it, and I worked it backwards. They had no idea that this woman would create a blueprint for this. Was actually made for real estate, and I created it so that racial equity applicants or businesses in racial equity zones would be able to raise money on a local stock exchange, right? So we are doing this. We're filling out the to become a broker dealer, investment advisor. This is really cool. We have a custodial bank, clearinghouse. It is a full infrastructure. I even have plugins that were created where the ticket tapes in. Now, let me say this. I would like to be able to talk to, if you are a fund manager, right, and you're looking at having something in your portfolio that that addresses social impact, we're actually looking at evaluating and selling a portion of the company so that they can be able to put that in their portfolio. So I think that this is a win-win situation. We want to be able to target. So if you are a fund manager, a hedge fund manager or whatever, and you have a cannabis fund, we are looking to partner with you guys and sell out so that you can have this in your portfolio and we can expand the movement.
I love to hear it.
All right.
Excited to hear something new, and Michigan is really a booming state for the cannabis industry.
It is. We're increasing our plant counts for our micro businesses to 300. Also, that came out of my group too. So we're doing a whole lot of things. We're really, really excited about what's going on in Michigan. So if you are in Michigan and you want to expand that footprint, please reach out to me, and especially fund managers. We are looking to partner and give other people an opportunity to be able to have a social impact fund in their portfolio.
Perfect. And one last question, we'll go to are you going to the NCIA conference in Detroit?
Yes, I am. I get a chance to speak on two magnificent panels. One, I will be speaking on the panel for insurance, but then I'm also going to be on the panel for social equity. So I'll be there. Y'all be able to hear my big mouth for 2 days in a row, right? And I plan on hitting every party in the area.
I might have to make it up there for that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, perfect. With that, I think we can go ahead and transition. If you guys all want to get your video and microphone back on, we'll swap over to the Q&A section.
Sure.
Thank you, Martin, for your question. I think we've answered a couple here and we can dive back into those. Kevin, off the top of my head, you'd probably be the best one to answer Martin's question about finding a reliable source of information related to cannabis crime statistics. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mentioned this Wharton study. It's got a little age on it, but it's good information. The ABA and CUNA, they both testified with kind of their crime stats, their data they put together that went before Congress in an effort to promote opening of the banking industry. FBI is starting to gather data on crimes, nationwide. State and local information's out there, and then also regulating entities, for each state. That for medical or for adult use, they're gathering data as well. So contact me. I'm happy to share some information with what we have. We at 3SI do some internal information gathering. I mean, obviously, our job is to protect robbery and at risk, and so we try and gather as much data as we can. But yeah, it's continuing to grow. A lot of it last year was a little skewed just based on riots and different events that we had in many cities. But overall, we're seeing a crime increase even outside of what happened in 2020.
Perfect. Well, hopefully a lot of the headlines will be criminals apprehended thanks to tracking technology, and you guys again will keep that perfect record. Love how you guys are cleaning it up and keeping it safe. Beyond that, there was one other question from, I believe it was Laura, to get to about kind of how the insurance market feels about cannabis. Chris and I are kind of on the carrier side where we're the ones actually issuing the policies, and we can probably speak to this pretty well. People are hesitant. You're in a federally illegal industry where banking is technically not allowed, and insurance carriers are typically very conservative companies by nature. So only a small handful really are interested in being in it, but we've really started to see the interest kind of pick up in the past 2 years. Chris, do you have any color you'd like to add to that?
I'd add that the reinsurance marketplace is critical to this. There are very few reinsurers, mostly in Europe, who will support carriers offering cannabis coverage. Until that changes, I think we'll see a very small marketplace here, because the people who are waiting on the sidelines are taking the same view as the worldwide market, which is if the federal government doesn't approve of this, they're going to be very cautious. So when the reinsurance marketplace opens up, then there will be more options on the primary side.
Absolutely. And even that's tricky where, some reinsurers can't have a contract with more than one, cannabis underwriting company or risk retention group. We are slowly but surely building our capacity and getting more of these reinsurance companies on board, but it is a time-consuming process, and you have to be prepared to go through a whole lot of data with them to get anything that you want. So
the captive industry is going to see a big growth next year. Some of these cannabis companies have huge balance sheets, plenty of cash flow. They can fund their own insurance operations if they want to. And if coverage is not adequate, or if they can't get the kind of legal defenses or coverage forms they want, they'll form their own insurance carriers. And that's how the insurance industry self-corrects. When there's a shortage of capacity, people form their own carriers.
Yeah, that's a great point, is that there's been, on the reinsurance side, you've got cases where clients are bigger than an insurance carrier can handle. And it's just, carriers just can't put up any more money for coverage.
Yeah. And thinking about the kind of lawsuits we're going to see, the limits that are on offer today are going to be inadequate fairly quickly. We're going to need a lot more capacity very fast. So you're going to be busy, man.
Hey, we are busy. We, throughout 2020, we were dealing with only $15 million of in-house capacity, and would have to work with other markets or facultative reinsurance beyond then. the start of the month, we were able to increase that up to 40 million, and next year, hopefully we'll have more positive results and we'll be able to continue to increase it. But it is a difficult process and definitely something where you need creative solutions in the space. So I do see a question from Shannon here. Is there a list of cannabis insurance companies available? Great question. We recommend reaching out to an insurance broker like Danny or Simone, who works with awful people like me and Chris all day.
Yes, you can always reach out to me, Candace. You can go to Candace Capital, which is CANNASCAPITAL.com. We're registered with the Better Business Bureau. You can go there, book an appointment for a quote. Me or one of my agents would definitely call you back.
Perfect. And Brian, I think you've got it here. We've got our contact info up as well. If you Google Simone Kaysen, you'll be able to find her pretty easily.
Yeah,
but if
you can
Google
find me easy.
maybe not. So perfect. Feel free to reach out to any of us here if you want more information on insurance, which would be a delightful thing. Security or alternative risk structures that help reduce your risk. We have another one pop up. Simone, it looks like we've got a question for you from Laura. What advice do you have for a women-run cannabis startup who want women investors because of the support?
Oh, cool. So there are so many different avenues. One, you can go to Women Empowerment in Cannabis. They have a great group of individuals that are all women investors and in the cannabis space. In addition to that, I believe it's called 37 Group. Google that. That's all women investors who are actually looking at doing startups. And then last but not least, create your own. So get a landing page. Go out and have girls' nights. Talk to individuals that have money, that have risk tolerance, that are in your area, that know you and believe in you. So if you're a startup company and you're a founder, most of your investors are going to be supporters and people that participate. Then also make sure that you understand how much money you're looking to raise. In most venture capital, they're looking at companies that are $25 million or more, and they want a certain percentage. But if you have a smaller business, then make sure that you dummy it down, make it smaller, and look at individuals who have a risk tolerance, and then also set the expectation to be realistic about how long it's going to take for them to get their return. But there is not a shortage of women investors. And just so you know, women invest better long term. We have a better return anyway. There you go.
I love to hear it. Well, perfect. If you guys have any final questions, shoot them in the chat now. Otherwise, we'll hand this back over to Brian to take us on home.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Matthew, for leading us in such a nuanced conversation, touching on all these different aspects of the risk management process. I really can't thank you and all of our panelists and committee members who made up the committee for this last year's term enough for presenting and really diving deep into such amazing content on our webinar program over the last 18 months, I guess it was. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. A huge thank you once again to all the members of our panel for presenting today's session, along with all of our audience members, and most importantly, member business owners, which make our work possible each and every day. You'll all be redirected to a short attendee survey after the broadcast concludes. Do please submit responses to that, as it will help us improve these programs moving forward, especially as we try and work them alongside our in-person educational programming at all these in-person events. As always, we'll leave you all with this end of event credit sequence highlighting the 25 plus member businesses that participated in this afternoon session and that made up our risk management and insurance committee for the current term that just wrapped up. On that note, in case you did miss it, applications are currently being evaluated for the 2021 to 2022 committee term. So stay on the lookout for the acceptance letters to be passed along via email in the next few weeks. All right. If you don't see your company listed here, that means that you need to head to the cannabisindustry.org/join following today's session to join the movement for a responsible and equitable cannabis industry. Enjoy. We look forward to seeing you again for another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar, of which 2 are taking place next week, and hopefully in person at our return to conferences and trade shows later this fall in Detroit. See you all then.